Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, a show where we talk about movies and, well, more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP. CP, how are you doing today?
Dude, I'm fantastic. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing all right here in LA. It's been a wild week, and basically LA is on fire.
Not in a good way.
No, it's pretty crazy. There's a lot of people without power. Unfortunately, there have been some casualties, and then there has been absolute property and structure damage due to these fires. It's pretty insane. So, before we even get into our shout outs, I just wanted to say a thanks to everybody that has reached out to me personally. I know some of our texts, CP, are combined from people back in the Midwest and everything. So, thanks for reaching out about the fires. Fortunately, I'm safe. I think CP, you're safe. We both clearly have power. Um, but we're hoping for the best for all those that, were affected by the fires. Pretty crazy, and it's really close to home. So CP, I know particularly for you, some of the, Malibu coastal areas, you've spent some time over there, and it's going to look very different after this.
Yeah, they got hit hard. And we both know a lot of people who've been evacuated, so our sympathy goes out to them. And thank you to all the first responders who are literally working 24/7 to try and save LA right now.
Brian Ten Bosch, we know some actual firefighters out there. I know people that work at SoCal Edison. I know people that are just going and volunteering.
We know a lot of sheriffs and police officers.
Exactly. Yeah. LAPD, different things.
Guys.
So, yeah, incredible. I mean, there's going to be a lot to, a lot of pieces to pick up after all this actually is extinguished. But I mean, as we're talking, fire's still raging. So it's pretty crazy. I mean, we are talking movies, though, CP. So, movie discussion is still going to be fun this week. I am excited for what we're talking about.
Oh, I know you are.
You haven't guessed from my sweatshirt, which I, wear this probably like every 3 podcast episodes anyway. But for those who are just listening, I am wearing my Star Wars hoodie, and I'm very excited because we're going to be talking some Star Wars today.
Yes, we will.
So that should be fun. But as always, before we jump into our topics this week, I did want to do some official shout outs. So first up, I have a shout out for Ryan Weinzettel, who messaged me and said, D-Man, is that a lids hat? I'm a fitted hat guy. So that is in reference to the photo that we posted of you and I being able to watch Notre Dame playoff games together. And yes, Weinzettel, it was a fitted lids hat. I actually think it was, my mom gave it to me for Christmas. So I think it was, it might have even been not a lids hat, but from the Notre Dame bookstore, right from the source. So, but it is a nice hat, and definitely I think it's new era, so it's a pretty good one. And I love the leprechaun on the back. So, or I guess technically I wear my hats backwards, so that would be the front. Yeah,
I guess that's technically right.
John on YouTube commented regarding long or extended theater runs. I think I posted a video about Home Alone going on sort of a 6-month run in its, theater days back in like 1990. He said, you can't compare theater runs then to now. There wasn't a rapid turnaround to home viewing. Now movies are released in theaters more to push home sales. They want the return on investment opening weekend, then residuals from the home market. If there was a set window where home sales couldn't happen, movies would be in theaters longer. The exhibition industry dropped the ball by not pushing for longer wait times for home release. And I think he does make a really good point.
I think I agree 100% with everything he said.
Yeah, the movies that have had extended theater runs basically did have their streaming dates extended out. You look at things like Top Gun Maverick, Dune Part 2, even Wicked, which is technically streaming now, but it's only through, I think, a full purchase. It's not even available for rent. So you got to spend like $20 to buy the movie. So yes, it's available to stream, but like not for free on Netflix. And when that's the case, I do think, yes, if the movie was successful in general, you're going to see it stay in theaters longer. But to that end, if there are repeat viewings, and particularly I think that's where long theatrical runs win, it's when people go back to see the same movie again. I think like opening weekends and a fairly short theatrical run work really well when everybody's like, I saw it and I'm done. But it's when it's any of those movies that I think you're going to get double viewings. That extended period allows for that. So thanks for the comment, John. That was awesome. And, hope you enjoy the episode. Now, CP, this is a question for you that I have already answered. My friend Alex hit me up with a question. We're talking Star Wars today, so this is a perfect shout out. He asked me, what is the correct way to start the Star Wars saga? And I wanted to address it, even if it's here in the shout outs. It's a little bit of a topic, but what do you think's the right order to watch Star Wars?
The way that it was created. You start with episode 4 and you end with episode 3.
So you're going to go release order on this.
Yes.
Now, I do want to say I went and watched all 9 episodes. You came and watched
You
all
did? I didn't
six.
know that.
Yeah, we mentioned this last week. It was one of the highlights of 2024. But we watched them in numerical order. I mean, did you have a problem with it? I mean,
No,
on some level, I think the end of Return of the Jedi hit better watching it in numerical order.
I would actually agree. I think it when you watch it in numerical order, it does focus the story on Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, I think so too.
I also think that you can see kind of the galactic political elements in effect much more as we see the demise of the Republic and the rise of the Empire.
Yeah, particularly in A New Hope, Obi-Wan has that one line where he says, something about, the Clone Wars and these times long ago. And then they also have that line at the convening of all of the governors on the Death Star where they talk about dissolving the Senate and all this stuff, which was really such an offhanded
It's so throwaway in the first time, in A New Hope.
Yeah, you're kind of like, okay, I don't know what that means.
But when you get that history, you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah, so they finally dissolved the Senate.
Now,
You're like, that's crazy.
The problem is this. If you do not start with episode 4, the reveal of Darth Vader in episode 5 is underwhelming.
I think, like, for Star Wars fans, people that have seen the movies, it might make sense to watch them numerically. But for anybody, I would say that's never seen Star Wars, let's say you're going to introduce the Star Wars saga to your kids. They've never seen it. They don't really know all of the reveals and all this stuff. I think release order is hands down the superior way because the saga itself is built around the order that they actually came out. Even though they're 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, it's called the Prequel Trilogy. Even the name of the trilogy is in reference to the release order, right? They didn't name it some other just like this galactic saga and this is the Clone Wars trilogy. Like it's literally called original trilogy and prequel trilogy, placing it right in release order. That's how it feels to me. So if you're watching it for the first time, I would absolutely recommend going through and starting with 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3. And then if you're into the Disney ones, go for it. If you're a Star Wars fan, I actually thought it hit fantastic watching it numerically. It worked really well. The other thing I want to say this as well, too. Star Wars: A New Hope is absolutely my favorite movie of all time. There is something to be said about starting at a high point and getting people into Star Wars, like loving Star Wars. I think you're going to have a hard time for anybody that's never watched Star Wars. If you start with Phantom Menace, they might not be all that interested to keep going.
That's kind of a good point.
Like maybe it's worth it. Yeah. Like start with the absolute zenith, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, or for that matter, just the original trilogy. So then after you watch that, you're like, man, Star Wars is awesome. Then you watch the prequels. You're like, oh, these aren't quite as good, but they're still really good. And
well,
fun.
the other interesting thing is this, in terms of scale of the story, A New Hope is the smallest. It is not dependent on having seen any of the other films. So I think it makes a better introductory into the franchise. That's a good point too.
That's a great point. Yeah, and it's just fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great place to start. So anyway, Alex, hope that helps. I think I can recommend sort of either way. I've also heard, CP, have you heard of other options where like they've done sort of like fan edits that like literally you'll pick up with A New Hope and then it'll like go to that scene where Obi-Wan's describing the Clone Wars and then like it'll cut back. So you're not even watching like entire movies. They're like picking and choosing scenes and then restructuring it.
I haven't seen any of that type of stuff. That seems crazy.
It would be interesting to watch it that way. I've never done it. They're actually hard to find because Disney and particularly Lucas himself, but Lucasfilm have been very protective of using Star Wars, even in fan edits. So I think George Lucas has always been a fan of fans making their own fan films. I think the original one was like Troops or whatever it was called. And he's always sort of been a fan of like, hey, if you want to make lightsaber videos and do stuff, but when you're using Star Wars footage, so the fan edits are hard to find, but it would be cool to watch one sometime.
Yeah, dude.
A new way to experience Star Wars. That'd be fun.
How fun.
And then my friend George actually messaged our Cinema Fanatics chat and said, took my parents to see A Complete Unknown. Freaking great. So George, thank you for your comment and recommendation there. So I haven't been able to see that yet. I actually haven't been able to hit the theaters, CP, but I'm hoping once things calm down a little bit, I'll be able to get back to going to the movies. And then finally, just wanted to say, go Irish.
Go Irish.
Keep that momentum going. Let's go ahead and get into our box office breakdown.
All right, everyone. So for the first weekend of the new year, let's take a look back at what we got here. Number 5 in the box office, previously 4, the movie Wicked.
Of course.
Number
Still
4.
running.
So this is interesting. This was actually previously number 5 last week, and that's Moana 2.
Oh, so it's doing even stronger,
Mm-hmm.
or at least holding steady.
Yep.
And then everything moved around it.
Number 3, and this was number 3 previous, and this is the movie Nosferatu.
Okay.
Have you seen that yet, D-Man?
I haven't, although I'm very interested to check it out because I've heard really good things.
So it's made over $100 million worldwide. Again, most of that domestically, close to 74 million. And that is me because I've now seen it 3 times. So
See, repeat viewings. They can keep this one in the theaters.
yeah, so if you have not seen it, I recommend it because it's one of the best horror movies I've seen in a long time, folks. Number 2, another movie I've seen multiple times and absolutely love, and that would be Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Now, this was number 1 last weekend, and it has made a total of $340 million worldwide, so good payday for our friends over there at Paramount. And number 1, which another movie that moved up, it was number 2 last weekend, and that is Mufasa, the Lion King.
Okay, so Disney's coming alive here.
Yeah, which is kind of weird. I'm not exactly sure why they had a resurgence of both these films. I'm wondering if part of it has to do with international releases. And I only bring that up because Mufasa to Sonic 3, Mufasa made close to $300 million worldwide, while Sonic made like about 100 million. So I'm wondering if it has something to do with phasing out those international releases for those films.
I'd also bet that it might have something to do with the fact that it doesn't sound like there were any other like major releases, like tentpole franchise movies that came out. And so film goers that, want to go to the theater probably are selecting from just that slate of films that are already there. And it sounds like with Wicked, Moana, they've probably already seen it if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're checking out some of the other new movies.
I think that's fair. So that is the box office for this past weekend.
Nice. Well, let's go ahead and jump into our topic this week. We're talking a little Star Wars here. Now, we're not talking about one specific film, but rather a topic concerning the prequel trilogy within Star Wars. So, CP, that topic is, if you could, how would you rewrite Anakin and Padme's love story? Because, first of all, I'm going to throw it over to you. Do you think that within the context of the entire prequel trilogy, that love story was successful?
No, it's not. In fact, I think it's probably one of the biggest failures of the prequel.
Okay, because I know there's literally like filmmaking objectives that, sort of didn't get a check on the box. Things like character dialogue, wooden performances, at times maybe even a certain lack of chemistry between Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman. So those are filmmaking elements, but then there's also stuff within the context of their actual story where maybe it was a little bit forced. I don't know, it was interesting. So that question, how would you rewrite Anakin and Padme's love story? If you don't believe it was successful, where would you start?
Well, I think we have to start at the beginning in episode 1. And I think there's 2 major failures in that movie. For one, there is a weird age gap. And I know we've talked about it before, and a lot of people agree with it. In kind of the best of scenarios, there's maybe a 6-year gap between the 2 of them. But most likely, most people think it's about 10, which just seems a little odd.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you, and for 2 reasons. One, I think just within our culture, there's maybe a certain taboo about younger guys dating older women. I think, when it's an older man dating a younger woman, people seem not to care all that much. But when it's a younger guy dating an older woman, there's just something maybe a little bit more taboo about that. And then secondly, in Phantom Menace, I think part of the issue is that we know that they're going to get together, right? Unless you're starting numerically and you have no idea that they're going to end up together, there's something a little off about the fact that Anakin truly is like a little kid and she seems older, both taller, more mature, in general, right? Suggesting that 10-year age gap that just makes it feel slightly off. Like it's not 2 kids who, right, like a love story in Stranger Things with Mike and Eleven, where it's like, oh, it's like puppy love. You're like, there's something slightly off about it.
I think the other thing, and it goes to the kid factor, and part of it is Anakin in episode 1 is just this kind of whiny nuisance through most of the film.
Yippee!
Yeah, and it's just weird to think that then when they see each other 10 years later, she's like, "Oh, I'm totally into this." I'd be like, he was kind of a whiny bitch,
Well,
and he
and they
still probably is.
she does make that comment to him, which literally got laughs when we went to go see it in the theater again just in
Hmm.
2024, where she's like, "Oh, Annie, you'll always be that little boy I knew on Tatooine." And you're like, "That's weird." Like when you say it like that,
Yeah.
like I'm like, "George, what are you doing, man? Like you'll always be that little boy." And then you got Luke over here kissing his sister and come on, George.
uh, yeah, I think the first thing would be if she had been Princess Amidala, but the point was they were closer in age. I think it would have felt more natural when they started to actually fall in love in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, or I mean, maybe even if in Phantom Menace they just went ahead and upped Anakin's age. I know he's the age he is for some of the Jedi philosophies to take effect. He's a
But
little old
George
to be a
George made
Padawan and
all
all
that.
this.
He could have changed that.
Yeah, I think if what if you had just cast Hayden Christensen in Phantom Menace? He's
And
already
they're
right
both
there.
15-year-olds or whatever. Yeah,
Right. I mean, you could have just done
that would have
that
worked.
and then you wouldn't have this weird sort of age gap that I think even worth noting is that that was something that George Lucas's ex-wife, who worked on all three of the original trilogy Star Wars movies, she went and saw The Phantom Menace, and that was something that really stood out to her that really kind of hurt was that she felt that was not appropriate. I think Marsha Lucas.
Hmm. Interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah, that was one of her criticisms upon seeing the Phantom Menace was like, oh, why would you set it up this way? It just forces a certain level of awkwardness. So I agree. The other thing is, I think in Attack of the Clones, when you look at sort of Anakin wanting to force this relationship, when I say there was a lack of chemistry, I mean, obviously the actors had trouble with some of the lines. Attack of the Clones is the famous I don't like sand. And it's a horrible line when like we're in the theater and people cheer.
Yeah.
Like it is such a weird line when he says that and then like he touches her skin and all this. You're like, oh man, there's just not great. Definitely awkward, a little funny. But I think George Lucas, when he was writing romance, he writes it almost like Shakespearean. That makes sense. Like they have declarations of love for each
But it
other.
doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel real.
Right. Where something like I think Han Solo and Princess Leia in the original trilogy works much better. In A New Hope, Han's obviously hinting at, sort of having a crush on Princess Leia. What do you think? A princess and a guy like me, right? He's clearly like, I'm into it.
Hmm.
But nothing comes of it in A New Hope, but he's pushing it further and further, but it feels very natural. They're bantering back and forth. There's sort of romantic tension when they're confined to the Millennium Falcon, and then eventually that cathartic release when she says, I love you, and he's like, I know, is just really well done. And in fact, that I love you, I know is probably one of the more iconic lines both in Star Wars and even in film history. But you don't get any iconic lines with Anakin and Padme other than the iconic lines that were bad.
Yeah.
I think that's what people remember. And I like what John Williams was doing with his, I think it was Across the Stars theme,
Hmm.
the love theme. I think that works really well. I like that. Yeah, and Attack of the Clones, I think they just force it too much.
Well, and there's these weird long sequences that don't feel like Star Wars sequences of them walking by the lake and walking through meadows, and you're just like,
I
I
mean,
mean,
there's
again,
literally a scene where they like roll around in a meadow.
right? And when you compare it to Han and Leia's romance, they don't have any sequences like that, right? Han and Leia are literally in disaster all the time, in crisis, fighting the Empire. And yet there still is this chemistry that is built between the actors and the characters on the basis of everything that's unsaid, not because they're specifically sitting there at a picnic together on Naboo. Like, and I think he could have done it through the action and the events of the story that we
Yeah.
just don't get.
Because you get those moments when they're like sitting around the fire and Anakin's like, literally, it's like Shakespearean. He's like, oh, I love you with all my heart. And like, I'll betray the Jedi Order to be
Yeah.
with you. And you're
Mhm.
like, I don't know if you've ever thought about just real life and like interacting with somebody that you like, you're like, anytime you just declare things like that, usually it puts the other person in like a defensive place where they're like, this is weird, feels weird. That's why like you literally like woo people.
Yeah.
You can't just like go declare your love for somebody. It's like you have to do all these subtle hints and things. And sure, is it a dance? It is. I mean, that's literally why we probably have dances. But
Yeah.
like it's you just can't do that. It feels unnatural, and it does here. I don't think it works right.
Or I mean, and I mean, and you can even think about it. Like, if he had taken more of a Empire Strikes Back approach to their romance, right? And it is literally about Anakin being a responsible Jedi, trying to protect the senator that someone's trying to assassinate. She, it, being the headstrong character that she is, decides to go look for Obi-Wan, regardless of the risks.
Yeah.
And there's none of this romance between them, and they get there, they go into the arena, and after it, they're kind of trauma bonded together. I would buy that much more than this forced, like, ooh, let's walk around the lake together so everyone thinks we're in love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't think the events of Attack of the Clones, to me, take place over a long enough period of time to start off that movie with Padme saying, "Oh, Annie, you'll always be that little boy that I knew on
Mm-hmm.
Tatooine," to them getting married.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're
Yeah.
like, "Ooh, this is like whew, extreme." Like I
Yeah.
don't know how relationships, work in a galaxy far, far away. Maybe the timelines are
They're
condensed,
very
but
different. Very
yeah,
different.
it was just, it felt like I don't think all that much time has passed between her saying that and then this happening. And you're like, wow, that's crazy that like she literally was ready to get married, when
Mm-hmm.
before I'm like, I don't even think she saw him as a potential love interest at all.
I agree.
So I just think it was awkward. I don't think George, as the screenwriter of Attack of the Clones, was able to organically sort of or naturally get us there. He just sort of forced it and was like, "Yep, they're in love, so take it or leave it." Now, I want to throw it over to you because you brought up something in our pre-production meeting that I think was actually incredible. And that's when you move on to Revenge of the Sith and you look at, well, I'll let you describe it, but you sort of bring up this idea of if Anakin and Padme's relationship had been positioned correctly during Anakin's fall, it might have been more successful overall as a tragic love story, but also for Anakin's turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the problem is George is writing with two competing motivations. One of this is Anakin's changing feelings towards the Jedi Order, which I think is a failure because if he just made this about Anakin's desire to save Padme,
Hmm.
then I think we understand why he would succumb to the dark side and why he would be seduced by the idea of these Sith skills that Palpatine's alluding to about stopping people from dying.
Yeah, and he does muddy this. I think he does it twice. One is when Anakin returns to confront Mace Windu and Palpatine when they're fighting, and he
Mm-hmm.
says the line like, "I need him," right?
Which I
Meaning
think is a
Mace
good
Windu,
line.
right? Mace Windu wants to. He's like, no, he's got the Senate under his control. We can't let him live. But then at the same time, he has Anakin say another line where he's like, no, he must face trial.
Yep.
And it's like there's this conflict between like, why is he really doing what he's doing? And instead of getting that sort of cathartic, like, as most bad guys have, that moment in The Dark Knight where the Joker sort of explains, like, I'm just a mad dog, I'm chasing cars. I don't know what I'd do if I caught one, or what's his line where he's like, if it goes according to the plan, where you're kind of like, yeah, he's kind of right
Mm-hmm.
in a way. Like,
Yeah.
I don't agree with him or his methods, but like, he's got a point. With Anakin's, it's kind of like he kind of has a point with both, but you don't know which one's really motivating him.
Well, and I think part of it is the idea that the Jedi are evil.
Yeah,
Like,
because then I was
yes,
going to say the second time is when he's talking to Obi-Wan and he's like, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And you're like, I thought you were doing this for Padme
yeah,
to
and it
like
just
save your wife.
the whole idea of turning against the Jedi Order seems wrong because I think as an audience, we're like, you're on the wrong side of history there, Anakin. Like, even if they are overstepping the powers that they traditionally have held, like, we can see more justification in their actions than in you, quote unquote, being this guy who very loosely adheres to the Jedi Code to begin with, now suddenly being the firm believer in the established role of the Jedi, right? And wanting to confront them about their failures to uphold that. We're like, that's not you. However, you being this kid who had a really terrible life where you were a slave, where the only person who really loved you died, and you have major abandonment issues, and suddenly the only person in the world that you care about, you are afraid of losing. I could see him being like, I will do anything I can in my power or not in my power, and I will find the power to save you. I
I
buy
think
that.
that would be more powerful. It would also lend itself to making their love story indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if George is forcing it, you're like, it has to happen.
Yep.
And I do think too, when you mention, sort of muddying the ground of Anakin's motivations here, another good example is when he confronts Palpatine himself. You're the Sith Lord. He ignites his lightsaber. He goes and tells the Jedi Order that he thinks Palpatine is a Sith Lord. So, so this turn against the Jedi to me doesn't feel natural. Like even when he cuts off Mace Windu's hand and Palpatine shoots him out the window, I think he falls to his knees and he's like, what have I done?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he really believes the Jedi were evil.
Yeah.
And so it almost feels like, I don't know if he just convinces himself of that, but this idea that he turns on the whole Jedi Order, I don't know, because they didn't grant him the rank of master. It just seems a little bit unbelievable. I don't think George got us to the point where Anakin would truly believe that the Jedi Order are the bad guys.
Yeah, in fact, knowing Anakin, right? I mean, he has lines in the first one where no one can kill a Jedi. Like this kid who is so infatuated with becoming a Jedi Knight, right? He's going to go back to Tatooine and free the slaves. I can't think that like his problem almost is the fact that even if the Jedi Order was corrupted and overrun by the Sith, he would blindly follow it because of his firm belief in being a Jedi.
Yeah,
Right.
or like try to save it or
It's
something.
almost kind of the opposite. Like he's the guy that like no matter what the Jedi do, he's gonna be like, yes, this is the way.
So, yeah, I think when you combine his sort of perceived betrayal of the Jedi, his desire to save Padme, and then if you even throw in the prophecy, as sort of motivations for like what's going on here in this sort of tragic turn of this character, I think it does make it a little bit confusing for the viewer. And I think you're right. If you were to center Anakin and Padme and make the entire prequel trilogy a tragic love story, that would have been maybe a little bit more powerful.
I agree.
Maybe even a little bit more Shakespearean.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, I love all the politics of the prequel trilogy, which I never appreciated when I was a kid, but as an adult, I'm actually really into it. I loved watching the prequel trilogy in the theater again and getting to experience how manipulative Palpatine is and
Mm-hmm.
sort of all of these other elements. But yeah, I just didn't know with Anakin's motivations specifically if George gets us all the way there. I mean, even when, he delivers that line, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. You're like, do you even believe that? Like,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
did you just start down a dark path and now you're like, fuck them?
Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like. And it just doesn't feel right. We love characters who firmly believe in what they're doing, and it doesn't feel like he believes truly that the Jedi are evil and he has to stop them.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, that's probably the number one thing when we look at rewriting the love story. I mean, I also think, and this is just maybe a note, it's not necessarily tied directly to their love story, but we have to also acknowledge the fact that when Padme confronts Anakin on Mustafar, I mean, not only does he choke his wife and is just
Mhm.
abusive here, which is wild, right?
Yeah.
Total bad guy. I also thought in that moment too that I was like, would Anakin really do that? I mean, he did it, but I was like, damn, that's crazy. And then at the end of the movie, it always bothered me a little bit that when Padme passes away, that droid has that stupid line where it's like she
Oh yeah.
lost the will to live. And I'm like, she just had twins. And I can't believe a new mother would be like, I just want to die.
See,
Like,
yeah, no, that's a really good. And one of the things I think about is this. I think that, right, we know Anakin has this rage thing going on. Throwback to when he massacres a whole village of Tusken Raiders, right?
yeah, not to mention, a whole room full of,
Yeah, yeah.
younglings,
He's got he's
Padawan
got
learners.
some he's got some impulse control issues. So I actually don't have a problem with him from the story perspective force choking Padme. But I almost wonder if in his rage and his frustration, if he actually killed her then, and then
Yeah.
that was the thing that totally threw him into the dark side of the Force. I think that that whole Padme, Obi-Wan, Anakin thing on the platform might have been executed a little better than
It
now, where it just feels really clunky.
it would have been crazy if he did kill her right there. I mean, at the end of the day, the story does suggest that he's obviously the one responsible for her death. But it's like narratively, because she was pregnant with Luke and Leia at the time, it's almost like it can't happen right here. Like it just can't because she has to give birth.
Mhm.
So it was like they sort of boxed themselves in a little bit where, yeah, I think if she had died there, it would have been like, holy cow. And now you've just gone way too dark.
I know.
But it would have been insane if that had happened. You find out after all of this, we know that him and Anakin battle, or him and Obi-Wan battle, but like killed his wife.
And you killed your wife.
That's wild. I mean, he already killed children, so it's not a stretch.
He's killed a lot of people.
Yeah, he beheaded Dooku. He killed Tusken Raiders. I'm sure, if you've watched the Clone Wars, he's killed many a species.
Yeah. Yeah.
He killed children. He's killed Jedi.
Genotions. Yeah.
Yeah, he's gone down a truly, truly dark path. And the turn is incredibly powerful, as is. It's not the worst, but it's definitely, it felt like if you were to solidify his motivation around one of those competing, I guess just motivations, then you might have had a way more powerful moment. So
I would agree, dude. I would
I don't know.
definitely agree.
But I thought that was a good point that by making those compete, it was just a little bit tough. So, is there anything else that you think you would want to add to their love story to improve it? Because obviously, like we said, from a writing standpoint or filmmaking standpoint, there's elements that could have just, if you kept the script exactly the same, probably could have been a little bit better. Or not the script, but the story. You swap out some dialogue for some better dialogue and different things. But like you're not really altering the overall trajectory of what's there versus like you could, change like the ending to Revenge of the Sith to make that incredibly more powerful. I mean, is there anything else that you think might help? I know something that I just never got with the prequel trilogy was this introduction of the prophecy.
It doesn't really, I think part of it is that the prophecy doesn't really work.
Yeah, I don't get it either.
I mean, well, I mean, it does work and it doesn't work at the same time. I think the problem is it's never clear enough in which version, because I think the
Well, for one, we never hear the prophecy. They never explicitly state what it is. They just consider him to be the chosen one because of an irregularly high midichlorian count and the fact that he was conceived by midichlorians rather.
yes,
There's this sort of messiah or
yeah,
element to Anakin.
but the problem is he's the one who's going to bring balance to the Force. And considering that they think that the Sith are extinct at the beginning of Episode 1, then the only way balance could be brought is to eliminate the Jedi's one-sided control over the Force.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
it
like,
seems obvious. I mean, they kind of acknowledge it in Revenge of the Sith, where Yoda says something like a prophecy misread, maybe, you know,
yeah,
where
yeah,
you're like, maybe you guys just freaking missed it. And the whole time, the prophecy means that Anakin was, always going to turn to the dark side. But it just, they never sort of explicitly say what it is, why it matters. I mean, how do they even get prophecies? Like who came up with that? Like, is that person accurate or like
yeah,
I don't
right.
even know. It's just stated as like that's something that exists, and you're like, I guess. Like,
Yeah,
why aren't
right.
there more prophecies? Like,
Yeah, no, you're right. That's like the only one in all of Star Wars, and it's not.
particularly that good.
Yeah, really.
Because then people make the case, they're like, oh, well, the prophecy really means that like Luke is the one that will bring balance to the Force. But you're like, in destroying the Sith, he sort of imbalances it back towards the light side.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's not a very good prophecy. I think another shortcoming for in terms of the story with the writing is Padme's character is kind of weird. There are moments where she takes a ton of action, right? She's
Yeah. She
very
has a lot of
decisive.
agency. Yeah.
Like, hey, we have to go back to Naboo. I don't care. We're going back. We're gonna go find Obi-Wan. I don't care. But like, so she's headstrong in that way. But a lot of the other elements of the film, of the film trilogy, she's kind of just sort of hanging around, watching people do things that she doesn't necessarily agree with. And I don't like that. I think that if she had been a character who was able to take more action with the agency that she has, I think we could have seen more, or we would have seen Padme in less of a passenger light for part of the, story.
Well, okay, I have a question for you then. Regarding Anakin and Padme's relationship,
Right.
there's this scene in Attack of the Clones where they're in the meadow, and Anakin suggests that somebody should make people do something. And she's like, well, who? Who? And he's like, I don't know, a dictator. And she's like, for real? And he's like, if it works. And I always kind of wondered, like, what if Padme herself had, stayed with Anakin? She has a lot of agency in some ways, but maybe she stays with him and they end up, ruling the galaxy together.
No, I actually think that that's very interesting. And part of it is like, obviously, throughout Attack of the Clones, there's a lot of red flags that Padme should have been very aware of. Mainly the part where he tells her he massacred an entire village of people. Like the fact that she's like,
Yeah.
oh no, like I'm like, like
You must be hurting.
yeah, I'm like, you weren't like, yeah, maybe this guy probably isn't
This
a
guy's
dude I should
crazy,
be with. Like, you know. So the point is,
but I can fix him.
yeah, right. The
Uh,
point is, so let me diverge here. I saw an AI generated video of the art of if Anakin and Padme stayed together on Instagram. And I think that Disney needs to do this as an Elseworld story. Like Anakin and Padme raising a couple of Sith Lords as they rule the galaxy, not like father and son, but like husband and wife. That could be really cool and messed up and like the dark Star Wars that I think would have been a lot of fun to see.
I mean, part of what's weird is like Padme's sort of dedication to democracy. She's the one who delivers that line, like, so this is how democracy dies, or whatever she
Yeah,
says.
yeah, with thunderous
Um,
applause.
yeah. So like it seems unlikely that she would go with Anakin. And she, I think, as a character is written properly that way. So that Anakin's turn, right, is really against all of his friends and mentors and everything.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it seems plausible to me that her character, in terms of like a love story, maybe could, but my guess is probably not. It had to go the way it went.
I think you're probably right. She's very consistent in terms of her philosophies regarding leadership.
Yeah, the Trade Federation,
Hmm.
the way, she becomes a senator, and like, I don't know, just she's always participating in this system and sort of believes in its viability, the Republic and what it stands for. And so I don't know if it meant, Anakin maybe sort of betraying something, a system, maybe the Jedi Order, but the Republic still stood as it was, maybe, but by turning the Republic into a galactic empire and Chancellor Palpatine becoming Emperor Palpatine and essentially
Hmm.
a dictatorship, seems unlikely that she would ever participate in that willingly.
No,
She
I
would,
agree.
I mean, if she was alive, I think she would have been there to start the rebellion. Like,
Yeah.
I just
No.
don't think her character would get on board with that.
No, I totally agree. 100%.
Okay, well, that's enough on that topic. I'll throw it out to our listeners. What are your thoughts? Did this love story work for you? If it didn't, how would you improve it? What were your favorite moments? What were some of the, funniest lines that came about? And I don't know, send us your thoughts. But CP, I wanted to jump into some behind the scenes trivia.
Ooh, I love trivia, D man.
So it's a little interesting, but I don't know if you knew this, but Natalie Portman was almost recast in Attack of the Clones due to scheduling conflicts with her studies at Harvard.
No, I did not know that. Were they going to cast Keira Knightley?
I don't know, maybe. I mean, it's kind of weird, but in The Phantom Menace, right, Padme, you kind of never know exactly who she is. It's always bouncing around. I remember as a kid, I didn't even know Keira Knightley wasn't Natalie Portman. I thought they just had her sort of like a twin situation, but
Yeah.
No, it really was a different person. So that's interesting. But George Lucas ultimately adjusted the schedule to keep her in the role, obviously.
Okay.
But that would have been crazy if they did recast her. That would have been weird. It'd be like, Rachel in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I also get at the point that like she's a teenager versus she's a 20 something year old woman in the second one. So you could probably get away with a recast, right?
Okay.
Whereas at least Rachel Dawes in The Dark Knight, it's like Rachel Dawes and 2 years later, a totally different looking Rachel Dawes.
Right. Well, so this next one actually makes sense when we were talking earlier about the sort of Shakespearean tragic, like romantic arc that, permeates the prequel trilogy. But it says that Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman struggled with the romantic dialogue, which is apparent on screen. They found it
Yeah.
challenging to connect with each other due to the formal tone that George insisted on, but that he was drawing inspiration from romances like Romeo and Juliet for an operatic love story. So the forbidden love theme was also influenced by 1930s and 40s melodramas, and they emphasized grand gestures and heightened emotions. So when seen through that lens, I mean, it seems what George Lucas is trying to do here is intentional, not that it was simply bad, right? It seems like he's actually like, hey, this is how I want it to be. So I don't know, knowing that, like, would that change your perception of some of those perceived faults within the prequels if it was like, no, George actually wrote it exactly how he wanted it?
No, because just because that's the way he wanted it doesn't mean that's the way it plays out on film.
I actually agree. I think that, as a filmmaker or even for that matter an artist, you make something with intention, you put it out there, but how it's received is how it's received. And you don't get to jump in every time somebody criticizes your line of dialogue and be like, "Well, it was supposed to be this." You're like, "Well, if it was supposed to be, then it should have just come across better that way."
Hmm.
So, I do agree with that. Um, so here we go. The infamous "I don't like sand" line was designed to reflect Anakin's emotional immaturity and lack of experience in romantic interactions. So Lucas saw this as an extension of his character and that he made it intentionally awkward. So
Hmm.
again, it's done with intention, but that's not the way it was received.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you should be writing intentional. Like situations can be awkward, but you shouldn't write intentionally awkward dialogue. That just comes off as writing bad dialogue.
Yeah, it's almost like he's like, "Oh, I need this to be weird and awkward." And then when the audience experiences it, they're like, "Oh my God, that's just like
It
horrible."
needs to be like he behaves like Ross at Friends, and he goes and buys leather pants for the date. Like that is the awkward that we would understand as an audience. We can't have awkward of, just clunky lines.
Yeah. I mean, Friends, like the romantic tension between Ross and Rachel, as far as like sitcom romances go, is one of the best, and then probably I can't think of his name, Diane and from Cheers.
Hmm.
That's another great one where they just have this great tension all the time. And if he could have captured maybe some of those elements into the dialogue so that the audience can feel that tension, but you're not just like stating it. I mean,
Yeah.
he's borderline having Anakin say, "I'm awkward,"
Yeah, right.
like by reading this line. The wedding scene was shot with a skeleton crew, and this intimate setup matched the secretive nature of the scene. So George Lucas was trying to cultivate this hidden wedding. So he was like, "We're going to do it with minimal crew," and I guess it works. I don't know
Okay.
that even
Yeah.
in the time of the internet that like anybody would have cared if like a still got out that they were getting married. You're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. The costume symbolism in Padme's lake dress was designed to evoke the natural beauty of Naboo while visually reflecting her emotional vulnerability and apparently growing feelings for Anakin. I will say that the costuming and design of a lot of what they have going on here in the prequels is incredible.
Oh yeah. No, I don't have a I mean, it looks really cool, but I don't know that I would have necessarily got that. So cool. I'll buy it. I guess it works.
And then I don't know if you've ever seen this. This is actually literally behind the scenes. But if you purchased the DVDs back in the 2000s for both
Oh,
Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, I don't know if you know this, but Padme's family is actually in both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. They shot scenes for both where Anakin actually visits when he's on Naboo, her family at their house. It's horrible. and it should be cut. I didn't like those scenes at all. I mean, they when you watch them on the behind the scenes, there's literally like blue screens in the window, and like they
Mm.
never even
Never
got all
even
the way to.
remotely got
Yeah,
the okay.
it makes no sense to keep it in the movie. But it is interesting that they were willing to explore some larger familial dynamics with Padme, which are never addressed. I don't even think she ever even she talks about when she was a child, like visiting this lake, but that's maybe the extent of her even referencing like her background.
I have not seen those. I'm gonna rewatch it because that's interesting.
Something else that is interesting is Natalie Portman expressed disappointment with Padme's reduced agency in Revenge of the Sith, which I think you were hinting at, is that she sort of, because she is pregnant and takes on these sort of motherly qualities versus she's very political in the first two and also participates in the action. She
Mhm.
does not really at all in Revenge of the Sith. And so that she felt that her character became too focused on her role as a love interest rather than a strong independent leader. And I think it's something that clearly we've even picked up on,
Yeah.
where I know what George, again, it's like I know what he's going for because the love story is taking center stage here and she is pregnant with twins. But at the same time, she's still the same person. And it seems crazy that like she would take a backseat role in, at the end of the Clone Wars. It seems like
Yeah.
she would be much more forceful.
Yeah, that doesn't work with the character we've seen in the other two films.
And then finally, the parallels between Anakin's turn to the dark side and his obsession with Padme were partially inspired by propaganda themes from World War II, reflecting how fear and manipulation can corrupt even the most idealistic people.
Now, that's kind of interesting. Obviously, Lucas has talked a lot about World War II inspirations and influence in the creation of Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, literally, stormtroopers, the
Mhm.
Galactic Civil War, I mean, I think had parallels again to sort of World War II, or even for that matter, the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's something that it's like, I think George Lucas was doing something with intention that maybe you didn't quite connect those dots. And that's one of the reasons that I think, especially when it was initially released, the prequel trilogy was very divisive. So, all right, CP, let's do some rapid fire
Ooh,
questions.
okay. All right. I love rapid fire questions.
All right. So, given the romantic awkwardness between Anakin and Padme throughout really the entire sequel trilogy, what would you say is their actual most romantic moment?
The most romantic moment?
Yes.
I think it's the moment where they go into the arena on Geonosis. I actually think that one kind of works.
Okay, yeah, the music swells. They do actually believe they might die. They're being
Yeah.
put into a situation where this is the end. And so I like the idea of in that moment, they do have to confront their feelings because you might not have another chance.
Yep.
So that feels organic to me. They've
Hmm.
reached a critical mass scene where it's like, I mean, if you're ever going to say anything, you better say it right now.
Yep. Yeah. I think that one works.
So would Anakin and Padme have stayed together if Anakin never turned to the dark side? Which
Yes.
I think is, yeah, I was going to say, I think is a pretty easy answer. Let's see. Do you think Anakin should have confessed to the Jedi Council his relationship with Padme? Because they keep it hidden, literally all the way to the scene where Obi-Wan comes and he's like, I know, right?
Yeah.
So is that something that it's like the idea of keeping it hidden also led to his downfall? If maybe you had just let the truth reign? I mean, it might have cost Anakin.
He would have been stripped of being a Jedi
Yeah,
Knight, but
probably.
probably he would not have succumbed to the dark side.
He wanted it all,
I
baby.
think you're right. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and then okay, so another one was like, what's the biggest red flag in their relationship? You kind of acknowledged
I
one.
always
Maybe.
say it was when he massacred all those Tuscans. I'm like,
Yeah, that's probably the earliest like major red flag where you're like, oh, dude, this probably isn't the guy. I mean, obviously, like when he chokes her, but by then it's not a red flag. She knows that.
yeah, he's kind of an abusive dude.
Yeah, right. If Anakin had confessed and was stripped of his Jedi duties, do you think where would they go? Do you think they just go back to Naboo?
I mean, Naboo seems like a pretty sweet place to live. So yeah,
Okay. Um,
he'd probably get a job as like a deep space like freighter. He loves flying ships.
I mean, yeah, he's an excellent pilot. Okay, here's one.
All right.
Was Anakin actually capable of letting go of his attachments, or was he doomed from the start?
I think he was doomed from the start.
Okay, because I know the scene where he leaves his mom
Hmm.
is incredibly powerful because he does leave his mom, but he never truly
Let's go.
lets it go. He's constantly having nightmares about her. He needs to go find her. And even though he did decide to go, that haunting nature sort of defines his character of he's constantly scared of losing things.
Yeah. And the right, I mean, the Jedi bring it up repeatedly. It influences actions. I don't think he ever moves on from it.
Okay, so interesting, but this one's just for fun. If Padme had access to dating apps, how do you think she would describe Anakin?
Hmm. I think that she would write looking for a mother because that's kind of what he wanted.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Mama's boy.
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, and then finally, our last topic on this episode, CP, is going to be a list of our top three moments that Anakin and Padme influenced in Star Wars history, which is kind of interesting because they do play massive roles, both being a Queen of Naboo and a senator in the Republic Senate. Anakin literally is the right-hand man to the Emperor in the Galactic Empire, and they do play some pivotal roles in, the history of shaping the galaxy. So I'll throw it over to you first. What are your top three moments that Anakin and Padme influence in Star Wars
Oh
history?
boy. Okay. So number three in the Phantom Menace, when Anakin takes Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, and Padme at the time back to his house to give them shelter from the sandstorm.
I was gonna say, is this during the sandstorm? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That puts everything on a trajectory where Anakin, where the Skywalkers matter in the universe. That moment doesn't happen. They find a different way off the planet. There's no Skywalkers and everything's the same.
It's actually really awesome that you picked that moment because it's really an act of kindness that
Mm-hmm.
sets all this in motion. He's basically like, listen, I can help you guys. And that's kind of his character arc as that kid is this sort of like, I want to help, which I think he might even say at the dinner table.
Yeah, he's naive and helpful, and that's the kind of the opposite of who Darth Vader is.
Yeah, right? Like the
You think
character
about it
arc
that
there
way.
totally flips.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Moment number two from Attack of the Clones, I'm actually going to go with when Anakin goes in and saves Padme from the centipedes.
Okay. Wait, describe the scene?
When Zam sends over the droid and it
Yeah, in
shoots
her
the capsule
bedroom.
in, and
The
she
scene where R2's like scanning the room
Mhm.
and
and
okay.
Anakin jumps in and cuts the centipedes right before they bite her, because she would have died there, and there would be no Luke and Leia.
Oh,
There
that's
would be
true.
no marriage between Anakin. He probably would not have fallen to the dark side. He probably would have hunted down Zam to Django to Palpatine and ended the Empire before it ever started without falling to the dark side.
It's actually interesting when you frame it that way. We were talking earlier about how he has these competing motivations, but I kind of wonder if Padme had died, do you think Anakin ever would have thought that the Jedi would be corrupted? Or do you think his desire to save Padme really blinded his vision of the Jedi? Like maybe he just needed that extra motivation
Mhm.
to go that dark.
Right?
I don't
Kind
know.
of.
Okay, I like that pick.
Number one, what I think is the most important moment from Revenge of the Sith, the moment where Anakin interrupts Mace Windu as he tries to
Oh yeah.
bring in Palpatine. Because if Mace Windu kills Palpatine, there is no Empire. The Sith Lord is dead, and everybody's happy.
Well, there's essentially like three predictable outcomes in that scenario, barring something crazy happening, which is that Mace Windu kills Palpatine, and the Jedi have to explain themselves. As is happens, Palpatine kills Mace Windu and then is able to solidify power, or they arrest him and take him to stand trial, of which it's a real unknown. We don't know what would happen there. And so it is interesting though, because not only would killing Palpatine essentially save the galaxy from his tyrannical reign, but also would the Jedi have become the bad guys that Anakin thinks they are?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I think the other thing that's interesting is if Palpatine kills Mace Windu without Anakin's intervention first, how does that affect Anakin?
Yeah, right. Because it's Anakin who basically ensures that Mace Windu dies
Yeah.
by cutting off his hand with his lightsaber.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's interesting
I
too.
mean,
That is
so
a
that's like one of those moments where you're like that's one of those fulcrums in the timelines, right?
yeah, like this kind of has to happen. Definitely interesting and an incredibly pivotal moment, in Star Wars history.
Hmm.
So that's literally where, he takes the hood and becomes Emperor Palpatine, not just Darth Sidious. That's where he anoints Anakin as Darth Vader. That's the
Yeah.
scene
Then he
where,
goes and kills the younglings. Like, yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, that totally works. I love that scene. All right. So, number three for me, I'm going to say it's the no confidence declaration by Padme for
Ooh.
Chancellor Valorum in The Phantom Menace.
Setting the stage for Palpatine's coup.
Right. She's already being manipulated by him, where he basically says that the bureaucrats and the lobbyists have control of the Senate and that Chancellor Valorum is basically a lame duck. You need to get somebody else in here who can take charge and take control of the senators, of which she falls victim to his manipulation and kickstarts Palpatine's ultimate rise to the top, where I think at that point he could always have run, but this was the moment where he was like, I can seize a little bit of power for myself. And it's successful. Number two, I'm going to go ahead and say that, one of the moments that influences Star Wars history is the secret marriage between Anakin and Padme. And my reasoning for this is because I think that solidifies Anakin's attachments. He's willing to hide this from the Jedi Order, and it ultimately
Forsake the
fulfills,
Jedi code.
right.
Yeah.
It fulfills this path that he's been on where he's like, I'm going to try to walk on both sides of the line, and does
Mm-hmm.
fails at both miserably. But also, I think it's because of that marriage that we get Luke and Leia and the original trilogy of Star Wars. Very important. And then number one, this is really just Anakin, but like you said, it's the continuation of the Mace Windu scene, and that's Order 66.
Oh. Oh yeah.
Execute Order 66. It is the downfall of the Jedi Order. It is Anakin truly, truly going dark. He's
Hmm.
essentially committing murder, borderline genocide on different levels, and ultimately is, on a path now that he really can't come back from. I think his soul, as shown at the end of Return of the Jedi, can be redeemed, but I mean, he's committed acts that he will always need to pay for, and ultimately, probably, he does with his life and probably should.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, he was never going to just be like some hermit somewhere that got to live out his life. Like, he has done horrible, horrible things, and he's a true bad guy now. So, and then Order 66 also allows, the Emperor free reign to just seize power, reorganize the Republic into the Galactic Empire, because there are no Jedi standing in his way anymore. There is no keepers of the peace that will make sure that, there's a check to his power, and now he can, do whatever he wants. All right, everybody. Well, that does it for our episode this week. I did want to say thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us talk Star Wars. This is probably something, CP, if you had just, driven up here and we went to go grab coffee or something, we would have talked about anyway.
Pretty much.
I mean, talking Star Wars is always, at the top of my list. And even though, shout out to my wife, she listens to me sometimes. I don't know if she always wants to hear all the stuff I have to say. So anyway, to our listeners, I would love to hear your thoughts on this overall sort of journey through the prequel trilogy, particularly Anakin and Padme's relationship. But there was a lot here that sort of covers all three of those films in the prequel trilogy, and sort of what your thoughts are, and whether George Lucas was ultimately successful with the prequel trilogy, which I know we've reached a point in time where I think the prequels are much more appreciated and much more loved today, especially in juxtaposition to Disney's attempts at whatever they're doing. But still, when you hold it up against the original trilogy and what people think Star Wars is, let us know. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. So be sure to follow the podcast at filmmakerscompass.com, where we have a feed of all of our previous episodes, as well as social links for all of our social handles, which is at Film Comp Podcast or at Film Comp Pod. You could follow me at Big Kid D-Man and CP.
You can follow me at NDCal5. Thank you for hanging out and talking Star Wars with us. We will see you back here next week. Until then, keep watching Star Wars.